Good afternoon, viewers. I have with me here the Honorable Anil Nandlall, Minister of Legal Affairs and Attorney General of Guyana. Welcome to One on One. It's your show. You're familiar with this environment and you're familiar with the studio. And we got an important discussion to have and to clarify for the public. And I wanted to start by asking you uh, there's a lot of information that is coming out about lands and about acquisition of lands and on behalf of personal people in government and people on the opposition side, particularly having to do with Mr. Nigel Hughes, who is the leader of the AFC in the coalition, in the opposition coalition. And I wanted to ask you, he essentially called on the government to freeze all land transactions in 2025 because this is an election year. He clearly was trying to make a moral point about land acquisitions in Guyana and the policies of the government. And I wonder if start there and let's begin to unravel what has taken place in between the allegations that have been made by Nigel Hughes and the response of the government to those allegations.
Thank you very much, Nazim, for inviting me to this program. Yes, it's not my first time here, and I'm somewhat familiar with the program and the environment. So I agree with you. A lot of information is out there in relation to land grabbing, and that's the terminology I see the press has attractively chosen to label and tag these transactions. But I want to begin first, Nazim, by reiterating a point that I made during my budget presentation in the National Assembly. I made the simple but crucially important point that in electoral politics, there are two fundamental pillars. One is trust, and the other is track record. The point I wish to make, and I hope that I made it with clarity, is that politicians make promises and they expect the electorate to act upon those promises and to vote them in office. At the time the promises are made, the politician is not yet elected. The electorate doesn't have a crystal ball. So, how does an elector or a potential elector determine whether that politician will deliver upon that promise? The surest thing that the elector can look at is to determine the credibility of the promise and the credibility of the politician in order to determine further whether he would deliver on that promise is to look at the track record of that politician.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because we know, and the ordinary man knows, that man, by his very nature, is a creature of history, he's a creature of conduct, he's a creature of his own actions. And you would hardly find a human being radically departing from the way he behaves. His behavioral patterns in the past could allow you largely to determine how he will behave in the future. Hence, I have decided to use that as a good barometer to explain to people. When politicians come to you and they speak, and they make promises, and they speak on high moral platforms, in order to determine the credibility, in order to determine whether you can trust them, then you must look at their actions out of office, and perhaps in office, more importantly.
Right.
And that will help you that will be a useful guide in determining how they will behave in office. And that formula, I believe, should be applied here.
Right.
And against that backdrop, I want to begin this discussion. So, Mr. Hughes is now the leader of the Alliance for Change. And in fact, he wants to be the presidential candidate for the entire opposition. More certainly, he's going to be the presidential candidate of his political party. Therefore, he will be going to the electorate. And all his forays in the press and his attempts at disclosures are all centrally directed towards the achievement of that objective. There's no doubt about that. And therefore, the population should be wise enough now to begin the process to which I'm making reference. How do you determine whether you can trust this individual? How do you determine the genuineness of what he speaks about? By looking at what he says and look at his own track record.
Look at his actions, yeah.
And his own actions. And determine whether he's hypocritical. Determine whether he's duplicitous. All these are important processes that the population ought to engage in. And not only to Mr. Hughes, as I don't want to personalize the matter only to him. It applies to everyone, including yours truly, because I'll be going to the electorate as well as part of the People's Progressive Party Civic to seek re-election at the upcoming elections. So it is Mr. Hughes who initiated this public disclosure about land grabbing and land giveaways at Ogle on the east coast of Demerara. He said to the population that a particular individual was essentially gifted 30 odd acres of land at $30 million per acre. According to him, that was a giveaway. According to him, that transaction was laced with corruption and nepotism.
And this land in Ogle is prime real estate.
He described it not only as prime real estate, but he approximated its location to Exxon headquarters and says that it is in close proximity. And he dared the government, in particular the Central Housing and Planning Authority, to show how Guyanese can get lands at this, what he was implying, this giveaway price.
It's a paltry sum of 30 million.
30 million per acre. So the first point I want to make is that it is him who initiated this exercise of public disclosures. Lo and behold, the President, myself, the Ministry of Housing, and the Vice President have been able to put out in the public domain dozens of transactions done not by us, not by the PPP government, but by the APNU, AFC government, Nigel Hughes' government. And I want to make that point because there's a constant and very deliberate attempt by him to distance himself from that government. The Alliance for Change was the major coalition partner in that government. And he is the leader of the Alliance for Change. So that government was his government. So we were able to put out there irrefutable evidence supported by documents of dozens of transactions entered into by Nigel Hughes' government in relation to land transactions at that very location.
In proximity to Exxon.
In proximity to Exxon Mobil. And we were able to establish, and those are the facts, that the 30 million value, that purchase price of 30 million per acre, was the one that his government determined. As Attorney General, I had to advise on all these transactions. And you know, in law, transactions in relation to land must be in writing. I had all the documents. We inherited those transactions. Many of them, fortunately, we were able to get out of for two reasons. One, the companies to which they sold and the persons to whom they sold did not have the financial wherewithal to pay off the purchase price. So when they were called in, they couldn't complete the sales. That's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make, because we're talking about land giveaways, the second point I want to make is that each of those purchase price, each of those agreements of sale, and there are dozens of them, each of them spoke to a deposit of 50% upon the signing of the agreement. Less than 10% of the monies of the purchase price was received in relation to each transaction. That's the second point I want to make. Thirdly, the balance of the purchase price on each of those transactions was supposed to be paid within a prescribed time frame stipulated in each agreement. In every agreement, other than two, which I'll put one side and I'll speak about, that time frame was breached and the balance was not paid. And even most egregious was the fact that in some cases, not a cent was paid.
Wow.
Not a cent was paid. I distinctly remember two transactions of 30 acres each. Not a cent was paid. And the title was vested.
Right.
I want to pause there and ask the population if they know in Guyana's history of any bigger giveaway of land than what I've just described. Now, I am just limiting my discussion today to Ogle, because I have a similar story to tell you about Enmore Estate Senior Staff Compound. I have a similar story to tell you about Providence. I have a similar story to tell you about Linden. I have a similar story to tell you about Wales. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of acres of land.
Wow.
Right? This fellow is speaking about transparency and accountability and processes and how the ordinary Guyanese would get land in this vicinity. There was no evidence whatsoever in relation to these transactions that I am referring to and all the others to which I have been referenced of any process whatsoever inviting the public to bid for these lands. None. Up to now, we do not know, and we cannot find any evidence of how these persons, the dozens of transactions that they did, how those persons knew that the land was available.
Right, there was no advertising.
No advertisement, no expression of interest inviting interested investors or interested purchasers, none.
So they waived all of those?
All of that.
Were they breached or were they waived?
They breached, they waived it. This guy is speaking about cronyism. And this here is the epitome of lack of transparency and lack of accountability, whimsical fixing of the price for the land, no violent breaches of every single agreement of sale, and then vesting of the land. The state conferring title
Right.
to
That's
the
what
purchasers
vested mean. Yeah.
without a cent being paid. Now,
Wow.
I am
And
thinking,
at what cost? What was the cost?
well, as I said, in some cases, no money was paid,
None.
right?
Hmm.
And in other cases, less than 10%. And the thing was done so incompetently, and this was the second ground upon which people were encouraged and influenced to give up the land, not because they couldn't afford, not only because they couldn't afford to complete the transaction.
What was on those lands? What was
No,
located
they
on those lands?
never did a proper survey and laying out of the land. So Company A got plot A, Company B got plot B, Company C got plot C, Company D got plot D, but plot D is behind plot C. Plot E is behind plot B. Plot F is behind plot A, and there is no access whatsoever. So other than those that were on the roadside, and they were not on the roadside, they were all in.
Inland, yeah.
You couldn't get to any of the lands without passing through another land. And even when you pass through another land to get to that land, how you get out of that land, you got to pass through another land. So there was no, and if you are in the third row, there is no way you're getting other than passing through the two previous sets of lands. So there was no planning, no organizing, nothing. And the other bizarre issue was, when were these transactions done? Of the 30 odd or more that we looked at, all of them were done after the government was defeated by a no confidence motion.
In December 2018, right?
The government, as the country knows, was defeated by a no confidence motion on the 18th of December 2018. And we are not in doubt about the effect of the no confidence motion and the fall of the government. Our highest court pronounced upon it. The Caribbean Court of Justice said very clearly that in accordance with the Constitution of Guyana, the government was defeated, which compels
To have an
the
election.
president and the cabinet to resign. And elections must be fixed within 3 months. Most importantly, by virtue of that defeat, the government was transformed into a caretaker mode. And then it was explained what caretaker mode means. It means that the government is it has lost its panoply of powers as a democratic elected legal entity. It is to simply remain in office for those elections, ensure those elections are held, and administer the affairs of the country on a day-to-day routine basis. Meaning, ensure that the population gets all the basic services. Ensure that the machinery of government performs its day-to-day functions. Prohibitions, it was prohibited, the government, from entering into new transactions, prohibited from alienating or selling state assets, prohibited from signing new contracts. Because you have lost the government. You can't bind the new government. And there's a rationale for these things. You are in caretaker mode. The population would understand that if you live in America or Canada, you put somebody to caretake your house, that is what it means. They must live in there, clean it, ensure that the yard is weeded, ensure that the light not cut off, ensure the water bill is paid. They are not to extend your house. They are not to paint your house over. Certainly they are not to sell it or to mortgage it at the bank,
Right.
because they are only the caretaker. So all of those transactions were done during that period.
After that, yeah.
So let's go back to Nigel Hughes now and his statements. How can this guy be trusted? And I'm not finished. I just paused there to go back to the question. Because that is the issue. We will deal with all the attempts at obfuscating those clear issues as the program continues. But in relation to those very transactions, there are two that I said I will deal with separately. And these two require a special mention.
But before we get to the two, I wanted to ask you something to clarify. Is Nigel Hughes buying these properties or negotiating for them in his own name? Like he is the owner of the properties, or is he doing it on behalf of a client?
So let me get to the two.
Okay.
Okay, that's where the interesting thing lies. I give you the general there to show you that the hypocrisy, and to show you that this is the guy who is telling us you mustn't do these transactions,
Right.
right? You're going to an election, put all government transactions on hold. And all these things his party did. That's the point I want to make. His party did in government,
Okay.
right? And I'm going to now deal with what he did. So two of those transactions, one at Ogle and one at LBI.
Okay.
Nigel Hughes was the lawyer and company secretary and or director for a company. So this is not him as a lawyer. This is him as a company secretary and as a director of the company. In those capacities, he not only signed the documents as a lawyer, he signed the documents as purchasers as well.
Wow.
And two transactions involving 20 acres, one of them, 20 acres at Ogle, in closer proximity, or perhaps the closest proximity to the Exxon headquarters. He's the one who bring in the location of the Exxon headquarters. 20 acres he bought, his company bought. And I'm deliberately saying his company bought.
So he's acting as legal representative of his own company.
Director and secretary.
Right.
I see some issue being made whether he has an equity in the company or not. That is not an issue. I am saying that you are the director and under company secretary. You are the legal face of the company. Right? Shares are issued at a later stage. So it is too early to determine what equity you have. At the time, the company was just incorporated. He was the incorporator, the company secretary, and the director. Right?
Documents reveal that.
And he signed.
Right.
Not as lawyer alone, but in those as
Capacity.
purchaser for and on behalf of the company. And while everyone else paid $30 million per acre under his party, under his government, he, Nigel Hughes,
Paid.
when he bought, he paid $26 million at Ogle
For 20 acres.
for 20 acres. So he got an advantage of $80 million over everyone else.
Talk about leadership.
Talk about duplicity.
Oh my God.
Talk about hypocrisy.
Right.
And this is the guy who is raising the alarm.
Yeah.
It is stupendous. It is amazing that this gentleman, he will raise the alarm when out of all the transactions, his company got $80 million on the deal.
Yeah.
But we have not heard yet why his sale price was $4 million.
Yes.
Was it because was his party? Was it because someone there in the government was influenced by who
He was.
the company secretary and company director was that was signing this deal? That is what should be disclosed. That we have heard silence on that. But that is not the only transaction. Now that one was executed, the agreement was signed on the 31st of October 2019. After the no confidence motion, 1 year after, while the whole country struggling to get David Granger to hold elections, Nigel Hughes signing up documents in a land giveaway. And that is a land giveaway. Because the government had fallen. This is the one who is now telling us we are a legitimate government, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
We have 10 more months before elections. Elections are not even called. This government is defeated by a no confidence motion. And this guy who is calling on us now, don't conduct any business, don't sell any land. He is buying from a government that has been defeated. So this one, the sale was 31st of October, title vested in about the 1st of December, 2nd of December.
1st of December, yeah.
Right? Then there's another one. At LBI, that this company again him being the major player. At LBI, 10 acres at $10 million per acre.
Oh, much less.
So $20 million less than the standard government purchase price.
The LBI property, describe that to me.
It's in Earl's Court,
Okay.
a residential part of LBI going into the estate.
Prime
10
real-
acres there.
Prime real estate.
Prime real estate. $10 million per acre. And you know when this was sold? The election was March 2nd, 2020. This one was sold on the 20th of March, 2020.
Wow.
And the title was vested, I think,
31st.
after that, 31st of March 2020. This is after the election was held, after the government lost that election as pronounced by the court, lost that election, and selling at $10 million per acre, $20 million less than the purchase price. And this guy has the audacity to speak on these matters and talking about corruption and talk about accountability and this guy wants, I see him calling for investigation. There's nothing to investigate here. What I've disclosed to you are the facts. And we have the documents. I believe the Vice President may have made them public.
They made them public, yeah.
What are you investigating? What is there to investigate?
Right.
But you see, investigation suggests that there is unanswered questions.
Yeah.
And you need a probe to decipher some ambiguity. There's nothing ambiguous here. These transactions are as clear as day. Now the population listening to me would want to know, well, what are we doing about it? We had made, because there were so many of these transactions, so many of them, we had to make a policy decision. Do we go behind people all day, whole day, all year, and prosecute and sue people in the High Court and locking up people as they did? They did that for 5 years, and they didn't do anything else. So we decided to call the people in and honor the transactions or exit the transactions. And that's how we dealt with most of them. Some of them are still unresolved. Hundreds of them are still unresolved.
Right.
We have put them on hold because we have a country to develop.
Right.
But this guy, these things were basically, you know, we put them to rest.
So in the two properties that we just talked about, that was transacted after the 2018 no confidence vote, and in one case after the March 2nd election. What became of those properties? Were they developed? Were they...
Up to now, they have not been developed. They're still there.
Right. Have they been paid for?
They have been paid for.
Right.
They have been paid for.
So that's
But the issue is the duplicity, the hypocrisy, the lack of credibility. And that's the point that's how I began the program.
right.
By speaking, by adverting attention to the importance of this. How can you take this guy seriously? How can you ever trust a man who, this is what he does? And then let's come to his personal properties, his acquisitions in Essequibo,
Right.
the 50 and 75 acres.
That he calls jungle property.
That, I don't know what he calls it, but you know, Mr. Hughes is a lawyer of some repute and has been a lawyer for decades, 30 or more years experience at the bar. And you really would expect a higher standard of conduct, especially in the legal arena. And these transactions are of a legal nature. So I have an agreement here where Mr. Hughes purchased, give me 1 second. Yeah, so let me get this transaction quickly.
The east bank of the Essequibo River you're talking
Yes.
about. Right.
Bought from an individual, we will not mention the man's name, 50 acres of state land. So this is the agreement of sale, you know. The agreement of sale is between Nigel Hughes and the person.
The gentleman, yeah.
Right?
On what date?
It was January 2016. But let's put that aside for the time being. A tract consisting of 50 acres of state land, and then it has a description. The sum of $2 million is paid, and $1 million is paid by the purchaser. Right? So he paid $1 million on the signing of the agreement. And it has a clause in it which says that the vendor, that's the seller, shall immediately take, $1 million to be paid, and the other million is paid, and the other million for when there is a transfer of lease. Right? So what is he buying? What is he buying?
Is it lease land?
It is state land, it says.
Right.
Right? Then $1 million paid as a deposit and $1 million upon the transfer of lease. So this document here suggests that this man is a lessee of the state and he's selling his leasehold interest. Mr. Hughes himself, not me, not Lands and Surveys, he himself disclosed that he has made an application for a lease and was given a provisional lease. Anyone who knows the transaction at Lands and Surveys would know, and that is what rang the alarm bells. When you buy the interest in an existing lease, you go to the Lands and Surveys Commission, the vendor presents his original lease, and there are affidavits that are done that he wants to transfer his interest over to the purchaser. The purchaser does a similar affidavit. If it has to be done with the approval of the Lands and Surveys because it's the state land. Once it is approved, a stamp of transferred with the new name is printed on the head of the lease, on the face of the document. And what you continue doing is continue to be a lessee in the shoes of that lessee.
For the time remaining.
For the time remaining, right? There is no, Mr. Hughes complains publicly, and he has brought this out, nobody else, that he's waiting for his lease. He has made the application for a lease, and he's waiting for the lease. And then is when everybody knew that it can't be the truth. And when the inquiries were made and the search is done, the man whom he bought from never had a lease. So, what did he buy? And how reckless can you be? That you're buying a man's interest. The man doesn't have any interest. And you as a lawyer, you have done no background check, no due diligence. And now you go on to Lands and Surveys, and you're making a new application. You're making an application for a lease, but you're telling the public that you bought this man's interest, but there was nothing to buy. And they granted him some provisional lease, again, after the no confidence motion on the 19th of December 2019 or something somewhere.
Lands and Surveys.
Lands and Surveys.
Granted him provisional lease of a land that was never leased.
That was never leased. And Mr. Hughes is the author of this entire imbroglio and controversy. He brought it out to the public. So then let's calculate, he makes price an issue. You got 50 acres from this man in one block, and then 25 acres for $1 million apparently. That is 75 acres of land at $1 million Guyana dollars. That's about 13,000 Guyana dollars per acre. If you check it. The 50 acres block, that's about $20,000 per acre. And this one here is even cheaper when you add the 25 acres and you get 75 acres. So he has acquired, based upon his own disclosures, 75 acres of land at 13,000 Guyana dollars. Per acre, that's what? 60 US dollar per acre? For an acre of land. And this guy
On
is
the east bank
making...
of Essequibo.
And this guy is making... He's saying Essequibo, but he's on the bank of the river. Soon there is no part of Guyana that will be underdeveloped. We are building the road from Parika to Goshen. All those areas are going to be opened up. If you look at our developmental agenda and our infrastructural plan. So this whole issue is riddled with inaccuracies, lies, duplicity, hypocrisy. And the population got to make a decision eventually. But we have to keep exposing these things and clarifying them for the public. Because a whole set of information is now being released in a desperate attempt to discolor the issue, to obfuscate the issue, and to confuse the ordinary reading public. And the bottom line is, the two transactions on the East Coast, we have made that very clear. And the two on the Essequibo River, the one in the Essequibo River, of 75 acres total, he bought nothing, he has applied for a lease. But he is running another story in the public domain. that he bought the sole interest of someone. He didn't buy, those persons are nothing to sell.
Yeah.
If it is that he was robbed, well, he's a lawyer. I don't know who advised him. And that's a very basic transaction. And, you know, there is no need for all this duplicity. All he had to come out and say is that I don't know what he bought. All he had to come out and say that he has an application pending for some state lands. Or he should just not say anything.
So he's making it seem that the Guyana Lands and Surveys is giving him the runaround.
It is now victimizing him.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
Because, and obviously, inherent in that is the contention that because of politics.
Yes.
But there are thousands of people who are waiting for lands at the Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission. He was lucky to get some type of provisional documents again, which he accepted, and is now showing it out after the government was defeated. But he now wants to lecture to us, a legitimate, democratically elected government, exercising all its executive powers, no disability in law or the Constitution or otherwise. We have no disability, but he is lecturing to us that we must not alienate property and we must not sell property until the next elections. I don't know by what principle we must not do that.
Yeah.
But here he's benefiting. After government was defeated, and we saw his company benefiting, after government lost an election, not a no confidence motion, lost an election.
Right.
So these issues must not remain in this this disguised and the confusion that they want to spread. These are very clear issues.
Right.
And the population must understand them. And that's why I thought that I would,
Yeah.
sit with you and try to explain these things. And I
It's-
hope that I have brought clarity to them.
You have, and I thank you so much. It's been a wonderful discussion, Minister Nandlall. Thank you so much for coming in and clarifying these issues, and I'm hoping the public would understand, if not gain a fresh perspective on what has been taking place, what is taking place. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.